Hello, everyone, and welcome to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. That is right. The sultry voice you're hearing right now is, of course, myself, John Martelli, back from vacation. And fortunately, the things were not ransacked too much. I want to thank Garrett and Brian for holding down the fort.
Yeah, it was the least we could do.
Though, I was able to listen to the show. Great show, you guys. Don't get too good though. Don't get too good. I don't need to get any weird ideas about taking over the show or anything like that.
I don't take over shows. It's not my thing.
Oh, I don't know about. I have to wait and talk to Brian about that. Speaking of, if you're watching us on YouTube, Brian is not able to join us today. He had prior commitments. I take.
He said he was on vacation, actually. So you just came back. He is heading out and vacation.
Yeah. I had a pretty good. I had a pretty decent vacation. It was Mustafar hot where I was at.
I don't know if it was that hot, buddy, because where I live is Mustafar hot, and so unless it was hitting over 105 degrees on a consistent basis.
With heat index, yes. But we had the added benefit of over nearly 100% humidity, if not more, which is always fun when you can chew the air.
Been there. I lived in Japan.
Yeah. But I am back, and I think this is a good of time since our resident Imperial is not here to talk about the Rebel Alliance.
Yes, we are talking Rebel Alliance today, and what was that, John? You kind of broke up there.
Oh, I said, where should we start with the Alliance?
It's kind of interesting. The hot take on it. I don't know. What's our first introduction to the Rebel Alliance? Because as far as I'm concerned, it's the original Star Wars film.
Yeah, well, if you're looking at production timeline of when the movies came out, yes. But if you're taking the movies in chronological order, you have that brief deleted scene with Bail Organa and Mon Mothma and Padme after I believe it was after the Empire or right before the Palpatine makes his decree declaring the Empire, where they kind of band together. That's kind of chronologically where I think most people see as kind of the birth of the rebellion, but I almost look at the separatist movement as the birth of the rebellion.
I think
that was the first. That was kind of the genesis of it, of what would come later, because a lot of the separatists would kind of later, as we see through Rebels and Bad Batch, those groups would later become kind of part of the rebellion. You can see how that would be an easy switch to go from, all right, we were going against the Republic. Well, now the Republic's become this. We're just going to keep fighting against this. They probably didn't see any difference between them.
Yeah. Well, from a canonical, obviously from a canonical or production timeline, I think you were right. As far as canon, the Rebel Alliance as we know it at the start of A New Hope, it's kind of interesting because they're not even referred to as the Rebel Alliance at that point. They're only referred to as the rebellion, and it stays pretty. That the term rebellion kind of becomes the de facto term for the majority of it, but it's not really.
Do they ever call it the Rebel Alliance?
Yes, they do. They officially call it. They do. They refer to it as the Alliance in Return of the Jedi.
Because I believe in canon, its official name was the Alliance to Restore the Republic.
Yes, and its official timeline has it starting in 2 BBY going through 4 ABY. So 2 years before the Battle of Yavin, 4 years after the Battle of Yavin.
Yeah. And was I right about that? About the name?
Yeah, you were. Yeah. And like they just refer to it for the most part as the Alliance or the Rebellion. Those two names kind of become interchangeable and synonymous with the full title.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting, like, because like you look at the history of it, and the history changes depending on like what you're exposed to.
Yeah.
In canon.
Yeah, like the first thing if I remember, in canon, the kind of the first thing that you see as far as any type of armed rebellion against is what's the Twilight homeworld?
Ryloth.
Ryloth. The siege of Ryloth, the assault on Ryloth.
Actually,
they were kind of like.
I think it goes back a little bit further though, John, because if you look at, I mean, yeah, the siege of Ryloth is a big one, but look at what happened on Onderon during the Clone Wars, because the Jedi specifically trained the Resistance fighters on Onderon to go against the Separatists.
Yeah,
and who was their primary leader?
Saw Gerrera, who is prominent throughout the rest of the canon going into the Rebellion era. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that early early division within the Rebellion between the Saw Gerrera camp, who was the do anything, by any means necessary, do what you can type of guerrilla warfare, to the more measured response, eventually that became more militaristic, but still compared to Saul was much more measured, of Mon Mothma. So you have Saul, who is here doing, as we see a little bit in Rogue One, and even in Rebels and other places where, he was willing to do whatever it took, even if that meant, civilian deaths.
Well, and I think because of Gerrera's experience during the Clone Wars, especially, like that whole thing kind of set him up for that cold-hearted, very militaristic mindset. Like he's willing, like, it's kind of interesting. Like you look at warfare, there's a particular mindset there. And the funny thing about that is that the measure of how well warfare is done is first, if you win if you achieve your objective. Okay. Second, the military or political leaders specifically win, provided they are able to understand the difference between the cost of a life spent in service to that conflict and the cost of a life wasted in service to that conflict. If you look at the Clone Wars, for the most part, the Separatists didn't want to kill their own people. They didn't want to kill any troops if they could afford it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason why they went about setting up a droid army, because droids are disposable. Yeah. I mean, if you hack down a droid, I mean, you can eventually scavenge parts, build new droids, or use the components for other things.
Mm-hmm.
People die. You can't do the same thing. I mean, you can clone them, sure, but in a realistic setting, cloning is not something that we can actually deal with here. And so you can see that mentality. So like what's interesting is you look at the prequels and they look at the Clone Wars, and the Separatists are evil. The Separatists are bad, or at least that's how they're projected in certain cases. I think the Clone Wars series and there are parts of the prequel films that do a good job of painting the moral middle ground very, very well. They get audience members to think about that concept.
Yeah, there's you bring that up, and there's a often sometime missed line in the opening crawl of episode 3 where it said there are heroes on both sides.
Right.
And I think people, kind of look at that, kind of like, go kind of, go past it because they see like, oh, Count Dooku, Sith Lord, General Grievous, obviously evil, but that, like almost like in any war, there are people who are, their government might be doing this, but they're fighting for their country. They're fighting for, whatever reason that has nothing to do with why the main government is, started the war for. They're just fighting for their family, their homes.
Right. And that's the thing, is that when you take a look at that microcosm of what happens, you've got characters, very good people on both sides who just want to do the right thing and do right by the people that they're fighting for, not because they want to harm the people that they're fighting against. Because you can see that there are a lot of systems that join the Separatists who aren't happy about the fact that now they're having to cow to some off-world commander, or that they're having to allow for all these droids to come in and invade their facilities and their homes and whatever, and put them under some form of martial law. But on the same token, you have the same with the Republic systems, that they're not thrilled about the fact that the Jedi are there because of one reason or another, or they're not a fan of the fact that war has come to them in the first place, especially if they're like some outer rim or mid rim insignificant system that doesn't really, they're just part of the Republic for the sake of protection.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing with the rebellion. You have systems that have seen the rise of the Empire and make a conscious, concerted effort to fight back because they saw what the Clone Wars did to their home world before and want to avoid that happening again.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, like, the one thing I want to talk about is kind of the makeup of the early rebellion and compare it to, real life historical rebellions that we've seen. The first two that come to mind right off the bat, as far as, especially when you see like what we saw the rebellion in Andor, or early on in Bad Batch and Rebels, is the two that come to mind are the French Resistance of World War II and, of course, the Viet Cong.
Yeah,
I think the Viet Cong would be more aligned with the Saw Gerrera faction of that, whereas like what you see with Andor in that is more, that's to me seems more closer to what we saw with the what you see with the French Resistance, where with the VC there, I think a little bit of both, but I think like with with French resistance and what you see in Andor is more attacking infrastructure, going after very targeted, we're going to pinpoint our targets very carefully. And, this is our target. This, with French resistance, this rail line or this Imperial base or this, this thing right here that has, these credits that are going to buy for all of this or this particular shuttle. Whereas Saul seemed to be more wide net. Let's just cause as much chaos as we can.
Saul Guerrero he's a little bit more tactical than that. It wasn't just like spreading as much chaos as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, there was some chaos to the guerrilla warfare that he was fighting, but I mean, you take a look at like the tactics that he used and the way he hold up. Like, there are elements. It's kind of interesting because like you look at it from the Imperial perspective. And what you're seeing is not just a rebellion. You're seeing insurgents. You're seeing terrorists. And so, like, another great example would actually be the British versus the Irish Republican Army, the IRA.
Yeah.
They were, I mean, the whole thing is based off of a need for Irish independence, as well as religious differences dating back to the Protestant Reformation and the forcing of Catholicism by James Cromwell. So there's a lot of things that fall into place there, and there's a lot of precipitating factors that cause these kinds of rebellions. Because if you look at the IRA, they don't look at themselves as terrorists. They look at themselves as soldiers trying to fight for the independence of their country. And the problem is, unfortunately, their own people get caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
Or at least were. I don't know how active they are in this day and age, how much of an issue they are for Ireland and for the British and all that.
Not a lot. The signing of the I believe it was the Paris Peace Accords kind of effectively ended what they call the Troubles.
Right. But I mean, you take a look at what's been going on over the course of the last 30, 40 years, 50 years in the Middle East is part of that. Because for all intents and purposes, America is more or less an empire. As much as I'm a patriot for my country and all that, but you have this long-standing history of America getting involved in conflicts where we have no business getting involved. Obviously we see this in Vietnam, but the irony is that under Reagan, we armed and empowered Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
Put him in place. What does he do? He comes back to bite us in the butt. And then what did we do to help kind of tamp down on what was going on in Iraq? We put insurgents in place, namely this Afghani guy named oh crap, I can't remember his name now. Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
He was put in place during George H.W. Bush's presidency. And eventually he became a problem for us just 2 presidents later. And you see this ball rolling of issues that have precipitated because of this involvement, because of political ties and economic ties, what have you. You see similar things happen in Star Wars with the rebellion. I mean, as you pointed out very rightly, that we had people who were part of the separatist movement during the Clone Wars joining with people who were part of the original Republic, who are now part of the Rebel Alliance, and they form together. And at first it's chaos. Like, they don't work well together. They have differing ways of how to handle things. You've got guys like Saul Guerrero who are completely unhinged and will kill anybody who gets in their way, even their own people. but then eventually what ends up happening is, like, unlike the conversion from the Republic to the Empire, what we see in the rebellion is that the rebellion exists for a short term, 6 years total. Because what happens at the end of that 6 years, canonically, is that they give over control of the military, control of everything else, to the New Republic. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, in film, and we don't get much of the New Republic. We don't get any history of how well they were working, how they handled things. Did they do things similarly to how the Old Republic was handled? Stuff like that. Yeah. We don't get any of that, unfortunately. But you see that. But you see that the it is transitioned over. That power is handed over to the people who should be running it.
Yeah.
That it's not the militants. It's people who are like, let's delegate, let's use diplomacy, let's let peace have a chance.
Yeah. I think it was interesting going back to the history thing, is how things change when you go from this kind of traditional, like you mentioned, Irish Republican Army, French Resistance, where it's kind of these small cells fighting, to what would be more akin to the American Revolution, where it is basically standing armies going against each other, where the rebellion becomes more of a standard military, where you have rank, you have officers and soldiers, and a seemingly more disciplined rebellion, instead of just these little cells that kind of operate independently. And I think you can see that in Rebels, especially, where Mon Mothma, works hard to bring these various different cells together, because I think she understands that eventually, the only way you're going to defeat the Empire is by facing it head on. Like, you can only pick away at it for so long. Eventually, that tiger is going to turn around and go after what's been biting at its tail, and you have to be ready for that.
Yeah.
We see that with a little bit with the Battle of Yavin, of course, Hoth, and then eventually the Battle of Endor, and then later on the Battle of Scarif.
Well, here's something that's interesting, though, is that you look at the events of how the Rebel Alliance was getting itself together. The structure, up until we get to the events of A New Hope, even with Scarif, like, the Rebel Alliance is militarized, they're mobilized, but there's still a lot of distrust even amongst its own ranks, which is why you have guys like Andor who are spying and willing to eliminate targets at the drop of a hat, which is what he was supposed to do with Jin's father. But if you notice, while you have the rebellion was not a full frontal military organization until after the events of the Battle of Yavin.
Yeah, that was the event that brought in, especially I think for the rebellion, the biggest get they got was the addition of Mon Cal. The rebellion, and adding the cruisers, those heavy cruisers.
Yeah, those heavy cruisers helped. I mean, they had the medical frigates and all that, but
because for the first time they had a ship that could go. Yeah, for the first time with the Mon Cals joining, they had ships that could go toe to toe with Imperial class Star Destroyers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting because like you look at the origin of how the Alliance got their start. Like, initially, like, they were a delegation of something like, some of them were members of the delegation of 2000 during the time of the Clone Wars, which included Mon Mothma and Bail Organa and Padme. And these are all people that met on a consistent, regular basis with Palpatine. So these are some of the people that Palpatine organized with on a fairly consistent basis when it came to senatorial processes. But the funny thing is that you look at the origin of it, and there are differing stories. Now, the one thing that's remained consistent for the most part is that the rebellion started on Corellia. But what's interesting is that the actual the rise of the rebellion is something very interesting, because I'm pouring through Wookieepedia, which has a different flow of events, obviously because of how canon has been adapted by Disney and Lucasfilm. But in the 2007 game, The Force Unleashed, we actually get our first example of how everything started, because the rebellion it involves Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Leia was there, and a few others, and they meet on Corellia as they've been pulled together by Starkiller. Like halfway through the game, after you are supposedly killed in front of the Emperor by Vader, the player as Starkiller goes about rescuing all these people, or collecting them, or helping them team up so that they could establish the leadership of the rebellion. And they meet on Corellia. The whole thing was about getting the Emperor's enemies together in one room, only for them to be, to try and eradicate them, which fails. But Starkiller goes and he rescues all of these leaders at the skeleton of the Death Star, loses his life in the process. And the reason why they even choose the logo that they do is because it's actually his family crest. It's not just this bird that they are looking at. It is, or whatever the however it I can't remember what the logo is supposed to be called, but you have this logo. It was Galen Merrick. That first name comes back again because of Galen Erso, but Galen Merrick, who is Starkiller's real name, that was his family crest, and they used that family crest as their symbol to rally behind, because he was the one who helped them form the rebellion.
Yeah. Now, I know in Rebels they kind of hinted that it was I can never remember her name, the Mandalorian on the show.
Sabine Wren.
Sabine, that was initially the logo they used for their flight, but it was the bird, and then it just eventually morphed into Phoenix Squad. That was their symbol for Phoenix Squadron.
Right, because I'm looking here on Wookieepedia. It says the official formation.
I know we're kind of getting close.
What?
Go ahead.
I was to say the official formation happens during the events of Star Wars Rebels, where Mothma she's resigned from the Imperial Senate, denounced Emperor Palpatine for his role in the Gorman massacre, and with the help of Phoenix leader Hera Syndulla and her specters, Mothma escaped Thrawn's forces by traveling through the dangerous Archean Pass to reach Dantooine, which is where like the whole Dantooine thing comes into place in the events of A New Hope. So yeah.
I know we're coming up on our time, and I don't want to go too much into the New Republic, because I think that could be an episode.
Separate episode.
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting how quickly, once the Emperor died, that things kind of went south for the Empire, and the rebels were able to kind of capitalize on that.
Well, that's the thing, is that it doesn't seem like they did that great of a job, because I mean, if you look at the events we don't have much showing the events between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, at least on screen. I mean, the bulk of what we get is that, in 4 BBY or 4 ABY, after the rebellion wins at the Battle of Endor, I mean, there's this quick turnaround where we've got this new republic established, and for roughly 30 years they're doing okay, but there's still this first order, this pocket of Imperials that still exist. They have and who themselves, like, if you look at how things play out with Ahsoka, and how things play out with elements of Mandalorian, have always been hiding in the shadows anyway.
Yeah.
And which it feels like they're doing their own form of resistance, their own rebellion. But then you get to The Force Awakens, and the First Order is a huge. It's not much smaller than the Empire was before. In fact, they've got way more firepower. So how do they go from being the losers to having just as much firepower at the start of A New Hope?
I mean, maybe in some of the upcoming shows they'll go more into that, but yeah. Let's wrap things up here with the rebellion.
Yes.
An interesting idea and concept for the Star Wars universe. Kind of the it's always easy to root for the plucky underdog, and I think especially through the original trilogy, the rebels always kind of fit that bill.
Yeah.
Of their equipment didn't quite work. Their starships didn't look all nice and shiny, or although an X-wing is still an awesome.
X-wings were
I'm sorry.
They spent all their money on the X-wings, which were really, really good.
Yeah. We can do a whole episode on just the fighters and the fighter ships from Star Wars. Yes, I'm there.
Although I feel like the TIE Interceptor may have been like the far superior spacecraft when it comes to dogfighting.
Yeah, the A-wing was no slouch.
Yeah,
I used to play the X-wing games, and I didn't. The only reason I didn't like the A-wing was the controls were so fidgety with that. You just barely turned it, and it was like going off this.
Yeah. Poor stabilization.
Yeah. Anyway, Garrett, let's do it like we always do. Tell the people out there in internet land where they can find you at.
Well, you guys can find me on Instagram and X at GKJ_publishing, where I talk about my show The Right Way. That's a show on YouTube where you can just search GKJ Publishing on YouTube, and you'll be able to find me. And if you connect with me on social media, you'll see those links as well. On The Right Way, we talk about book recommendations, author interviews, and creative writing tips. I'm actually in the process of planning season 7 now. I've got about half of my interviews for season 7 ready to go. I'm still working on filling out content, but hey, we're only in the early part of August, so cool. There's a lot more time to go. I also talk about my books, The Archives of Async Ran, which is a fun, currently 5-book fantasy series. Sword and sorcery, dragons, elves, magic, and vampires that don't sparkle, for those of you who are not fans of Twilight. Brian's not here today because obviously he's on vacation, but you guys can connect with him on facebook.com/the.sith.library/. or on Instagram at Corrosis. You can see that stuff. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see the that streaming right across the bottom of the screen. He has a huge following, 50,000 followers on Facebook for that, and he and the people that he works with, they put together a lot of content on Sith lore and even to some extent Imperial lore. So definitely something to check out. It's a lot of fun.
Of course, as for us right here, if you want to get a hold of us, our email is warthestars1@gmail.com. Our Instagram is @_of_the_Star Wars. Was that right? _war_of_the_stars1. That's a lot of words.
Yeah.
That's our Instagram. Our handle on X is @warthestars1. And of course, you can find us on YouTube for right now at SW Child, where you can watch the episodes of Star Wars Through the Eyes of a Child, where myself and my daughter are going through the Clone Wars and watching it in chronological order. We haven't put up an episode for a while, but we're planning on putting out one probably pretty soon, I hope. I don't like to make too many promises because, if anybody who's a dad of a 9-year-old knows how that can be.
Yeah, kids are fickle.
They can be. Also, on a quick little note, off topic, I just want to put a plug out, even though I know they won't hear this. If you're ever in the Branson, Missouri area, go to the Disney experience there in Branson. It is very cool if you're a fan of the old, especially the old Disney cartoons. It is really, really cool experience there. If you've ever been to the, it's done by the same people who did the art exhibit by, and I can't think of the artist's name, French, cut off his ear.
Oh, Van Gogh.
The same people who did the Van Gogh exhibit have done this. It's really cool. Like I said, if you're in the Branson area, it's a must see, especially if you have kids. The kids will love it. Of course, also if you want to support the show, Ko-fi.com/War of the Stars, or you can go to our Spreadshirt store at spreadshirt.com/shop/war-of-the-stars. That about does it. That is a lot of dashes and no Rindars.
I know, right? Oh, that's a Shadows of the Empire joke for those of you who are
yes Dash Rindar. Oh,
deep cut.
Yes.
As always,
or as I like to call him, Timu Han Solo.
Yeah, right. As always, you guys can find us on Geek News Now on their YouTube and Spotify. Just make sure to follow if you're going on YouTube, it's Geek News Now Official. That's the one. That's the channel you want to follow. New episodes get loaded up every, I believe it's Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. So this episode should be up by that point this week. So yeah, Geek News Now, where you can get your geeky stuff on.
Exactly. That will do it for us. As always, remember, this is not just my Star Wars. This is not your Star Wars. This is our Star Wars. Until next time, may the Force be with you.
And also with you.